The late evening settled over the countryside home, where the silence was so thick that one could hear the crackling of logs in the fireplace and the faint aroma of freshly brewed herbal tea that she had been simmering slowly, enjoying the warmth from the stove. Her husband had gone to the city on business and wouldn't return until tomorrow, leaving her alone in this spacious, cozy nest, where every corner breathed memories of family dinners, children's laughter, and quiet conversations over meals, times when the house was full of life and now felt too vast for just one. She cherished these moments of solitude. They allowed her to be herself without masks or pretense, without the need to monitor every word or gesture, simply breathing freely, reflecting on the past and the future, contemplating how the years flew by while she still felt vibrant, despite the wrinkles and gray strands in her hair. A light silk robe, the kind that softly clung to her body, hung loosely on her, and she hadn't tied the belt tighter because why bother? The house was empty, only the echo of her footsteps on the wooden floor mingling with the whisper of the wind in the garden, where leaves rustled like autumn's soft whispers, reminding her of the approaching winter. She poured herself a cup, inhaling the steam mixed with hints of mint and chamomile, and thought about how nice it was to be alone with her thoughts, away from the hustle of daily life, without phone calls and worries, just sitting by the window, watching the darkening garden where tree shadows stretched like long fingers, recalling her youth when such evenings seemed endless, full of promises and adventures. But suddenly, there was a knock at the door, not a ring, but a firm, insistent rap, as if the visitor knew they were expected, breaking her tranquility and causing her heart to quicken at the unexpectedness. At this hour, in such solitude, visitors were rare, and she wondered who it could be. Perhaps a neighbor with a request, or a mail carrier with a late package? Or maybe her husband had decided to return early, forgetting something important. She flinched, almost spilling her tea, and froze. Listening to the sounds outside, trying to guess, but the knock came again, more insistently, prompting her to set the cup down on the table. She adjusted her robe as she moved, though not too carefully, her hair in disarray, her face devoid of makeup. But in her own home, she was not accustomed to fussing over her appearance. This was her sanctuary, where she could be who she was, without judgment or scrutiny. Approaching the door, she cracked it open, and the cool evening air rushed in, bringing with it the scent of fallen leaves, damp earth, and something fresh, like after rain, even though it hadn't rained, and there stood Mike, her son-in-law, tall and fit, with those gray eyes that always seemed to look a little deeper than necessary, as if trying to unravel a hidden mystery within her. He smiled that smile that sometimes sent shivers down her spine, a mix of confidence and a subtle challenge. He knew more than he let on. In his hands was a worn bag filled with papers, and he appeared so composed, as if this wasn't a spontaneous visit but a planned meeting he had prepared for. She noticed how his jacket was slightly damp from the mist, and his hair was tousled by the wind. "Good evening. I'm sorry for dropping by so late, but I thought I'd come by and drop off the reports. They've been sitting in Lena's bag, and I figured it'd be better to hand them over myself rather than delay," he said, his voice carrying a slight rasp, as if from a long journey or from the nervousness he was trying to hide, yet it seeped through his tone, making his words feel warmer, more intimate. She blinked, trying to gather her thoughts, as his appearance was unexpected, and she didn't know whether to feel pleased or cautious, but she stepped back, allowing him inside, and the draft brushed against her skin, causing her robe to flutter slightly, exposing her shoulder for a moment, and she felt a slight chill not just from the cold but from something else, something elusive. "Come in, don't just stand there, it's cold," she said, trying to sound welcoming. Yet inside, something strange stirred, not fear, but rather a warm, unsettling premonition, like the flame in the fireplace that was about to blaze brighter, illuminating all corners and shadows. She thought about how long it had been since they had been alone together. Usually, it was always with Lena or her husband, but now here he was, in her home, on this quiet evening. He stepped into the foyer, shaking off the evening mist from his shoulders, and made his way into the living room. It was as if this were his home, not hers, with such ease, as if he knew every turn, every step. She remembered how he had helped with repairs last summer, fixing the roof and shelves, working for hours, sweating under the sun. Back then, his presence felt useful, almost familial, like a part of the family. But now, in this silence, without any outside eyes, everything felt different, sharper, with an undercurrent she didn't want to acknowledge, yet it hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace. She offered him a seat by the fire, where the flames crackled comfortably, casting golden glimmers on the walls, and poured him a cup of tea, the warmth of the moment wrapping around them like the soft glow of the firelight. The steam from the tea swirled in the air as she felt his gaze follow her, subtle yet intense. He noticed how the robe hugged her figure, how her hair cascaded over her shoulders, how she moved, and it made her acutely aware of herself. In the mirror, she no longer saw just a woman of a certain age, but someone who could still attract, still spark interest. The robe was tied securely, yet she found herself standing closer than necessary, the air between them charged, like the moment before a storm when electricity crackles with every breath. She wondered why he had come now, knowing her husband was away, that they were alone. The thought pricked at her, but it didn't deter her. "You knew I was here alone," she said softly, stirring her spoon in the cup. The sound of metal against porcelain echoed in the silence, emphasizing the emptiness of the house. She looked at him, waiting for a response, trying to read the truth in his eyes. He didn't answer immediately, taking a sip, placing the cup on the armrest of the chair, and exhaling as if gathering his thoughts. At that moment, the fire in the fireplace flared brighter, illuminating his face, sharpening his features, deepening the intensity in his eyes. "Yes, I knew," he replied, his tone carrying a hint of something that sent shivers down her spine. Not a threat, but an invitation, a warmth that beckoned her closer, despite the risk of getting burned. She sat down across from him, crossing her arms to keep the fabric in place, and suddenly the room felt smaller, the walls closer. The light from the fire cast shadows that highlighted his sharp cheekbones, light stubble, and a silhouette that looked less like a son-in-law and more like a man who understood the power of his gaze. She couldn't help but compare him to her husband, who always seemed weary. The comparison stung with guilt, but she pushed the thought away. And damn it, she noticed his attention, and it stirred memories of times when she felt desired, full of life, not just a mother and wife, but a woman capable of passion and adventure. That thought made her heart race, reminiscent of her youth. "The reports are important. Couldn't they wait until tomorrow when everyone's here?" she asked, trying to diffuse the tension that thickened like smoke from the fireplace, wrapping around them, making the air heavy. "They're not urgent, but I don't like to postpone what can be done now, especially when there's a reason to stop by and see you." He shrugged, but there was something new, intriguing in his smirk, like a hint of a secret. She felt her cheeks warm, though she tried not to show it. "Lena would have definitely forgotten, and I thought I'd drop by, talk about something that's been hanging in the air for a while," he added, his voice lowering as if sharing a secret meant only for her. She nodded, hiding her slight confusion because his words struck a chord she had been trying to avoid, and questions swirled inside her. Why was he really here, at this late hour, when the night had draped over the garden and the moon shone through the clouds? "So, you're our model of responsibility, always so punctual, always a step ahead," she added with irony. But inside, she wondered if this was a game, a test, or something more. The uncertainty excited her in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "I try, especially when it comes to interesting meetings like this, where we can talk without interruptions," he countered, and his gaze seemed to delve deeper into her. Into the thoughts that were better left unspoken. Thoughts of the forbidden, of what could be if not for family ties. She took a sip to avert her eyes, the taste of herbs bitter like her musings, prohibited yet so alive, stirring her blood. She thought he must notice her confusion, her reaction, and it made this situation even more charged. What was he thinking? Why did his presence stir her so, reminding her of her identity as a woman rather than just a mother-in-law? And why couldn't she just stand up, end this, say it was late and walk him to the door? Then she noticed his eyes drifting lower, catching the neckline of her robe, the fabric betraying her as it parted slightly, revealing skin, and her heart skipped a beat because there was an unmasked admiration in his gaze that flattered her despite everything. "You're always so attentive to details, never missing a thing," she emphasized, unsure why. Perhaps to test him or herself, to understand where this was leading. Her voice trembled slightly, but she tried to mask it. He leaned forward, resting on his knees, his shirt stretching over his shoulders and muscles. She couldn't help but notice, especially as the air between them vibrated like a taut string. "Only when the details are worth it, when they're that captivating," he replied quietly. She nearly choked on her sip, for it was a boldness, pure and challenging, thrown down like a gauntlet, and inside, everything spun. A mix of irritation and exhilaration. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the cozy living room. Sarah leaned back against the plush cushions of the sofa, her robe slipping slightly off her shoulder, revealing a hint of skin. She felt a rush of warmth as Michael, her son-in-law, settled into the chair across from her, his gaze unwavering. "Michael, you're crossing boundaries." "This isn't a joke," she said, her voice softer than she intended, almost inviting. Part of her didn't want to stop, she was curious about where this would lead, and the thrill of the unknown both frightened and excited her. "Maybe I am crossing boundaries, but isn't that what life is about? Taking risks," he replied, his eyes glimmering with something that made her heart race. "Or maybe I'm just speaking the truth." The weight of his words hung in the air, stirring memories of her youth, of passion, and the feeling of being desired. She stood up to refill her cup of herbal tea, though it was still nearly full. The movement was an excuse, a way to create space and cool the tension that crackled between them. She felt his eyes on her back, a burning sensation that ignited her skin. "Your hospitality is unmatched, as always. You never turn away a late guest," he said, his voice closer than she expected, laced with a playful tone. She turned sharply, surprised to find him standing just a couple of steps away, tall and close. The air thickened, charged with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Only for useful guests, those who bring news or help," she replied, attempting to inject irony into her words. But it came out differently, like an unintentional invitation that hung between them, amplifying the tension. "You look beautiful in this evening light. It makes you even more captivating," he remarked, raising an eyebrow as he appraised her robe. His compliment struck her like a long-forgotten melody, causing her cheeks to flush. She chuckled lightly, trying to dispel the heaviness that lingered in the air, thick as the steam from her tea. "That's what they say when they don't know how to compliment someone in a robe instead of an evening gown," she retorted, casting him a quick glance. She hoped her tone sounded playful, but an unexpected warmth crept into her voice, betraying her interest. Michael didn't respond right away. She stood by the window, watching the twilight deepen as the moon hid behind clouds. She heard the floor creak as he rose, his steps quiet yet firm, drawing closer. He stopped at the coffee table, just a couple of steps away from her. She didn't turn around, but she could feel his presence like the warmth of a fireplace, already igniting a shiver down her spine. "No," he said, his voice dropping to a low, silky tone that wrapped around her like fog. It was the kind of voice that made a person seem real, alive, impossible to look away from, filled with a fire that beckoned. The word real struck her like a pebble dropped into still water, sending ripples through her thoughts. Did he mean she was real, or was he seeing something in her that she hadn't noticed in years? A spark that time had dimmed but was still smoldering, ready to ignite. She remained still, continuing to gaze out the window, but now she saw neither the garden lights nor the trees, only the reflection of her swirling thoughts, confusion, desire, and everything she felt about his closeness. He was there, doing nothing but watching. She felt it so acutely, as if his gaze was a touch, light yet insistent, penetrating to her core. "Michael," she began, but the words caught in her throat. What did she want to say? To leave? To tell him not to look at her like that? Or perhaps something entirely different, something she feared to voice aloud because it could shatter the delicate balance of family, yet offer the adrenaline and life she craved. She turned her head, and their eyes met. His were gray, deep like autumn twilight, a place where one could easily lose themselves if not careful. But that evening, she wasn't being careful, and the intoxication of it all felt like wine coursing through her veins. "You always say such things, such compliments," she asked, trying to lighten the mood, but her voice came out softer than she intended, almost intimate, like a whisper in the dark. "Or is this just for the mother-in-law who serves you tea by the fire?" He smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was like a key unlocking something better left closed, a forbidden door into a world where rules didn't apply. "Only for those who make the evening special, who make you forget everything, time, duty," he replied. In his words was a rhythm that made her heart race, echoing like a drum in her chest. He didn't move closer, but the space between them felt charged, alive with unspoken possibilities. The evening air in the small town of Maplewood was thick with an unspoken tension as Sarah stood by the window, her heart racing. Michael was there, just a few feet away, his gaze locked onto her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric, drawing her closer as if it were a magnetic force. She turned to face him, leaning against the window frame for support. The soft fabric of her robe slipped from her shoulder, but she didn't bother to adjust it. Let him see, she thought. If this was a game, she was willing to play. His eyes, a stormy gray, flickered with something that made her breath hitch, a mix of desire and challenge, a fire that beckoned and burned. "Maybe I'm not afraid of getting burned," he seemed to answer her unspoken question, his voice dropping to a husky whisper that sent shivers down her spine. Sarah turned back to the window, trying to gather her thoughts, but her heart thudded like a drum in her chest. She knew she should say something firm, remind him of the reports waiting on the table, of family obligations, of what was right. But the words eluded her, caught in her throat, because a part of her craved this moment, this rush of feeling alive. Speaking of reports, she finally managed, nodding toward the bag on the table. "You brought them, right? Maybe it's time to go?" "It's late." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying her nerves. He didn't move, merely tilted his head as if weighing her words, then stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Maybe it's time, but I don't want to leave just yet, not when everything feels so charged," he replied, his tone suggesting he had no intention of departing. Standing there with her tousled hair and that damned robe, Sarah suddenly realized she didn't want him to leave at all. It awakened something dormant within her, something she had long since buried. The silence hung between them again, louder than any words. It was magnetic, and she felt his hand almost brushing against hers, suspended in the air. They were on the brink, the atmosphere crackling like the air before a storm. "Soon," Michael murmured, but his eyes told a different story. They burned with a fierce intensity that held her captive, and she found herself unwilling to guide him to the door. Her legs felt rooted to the floor, as if they had grown heavy with the weight of the moment. Let him find his own way out if he could. She remained in the living room, the silence settling back into the house, but it was different now, not cozy, but taut, like a string ready to snap at the slightest touch. Setting her mug down, her hands trembled slightly as she made her way to the bedroom. A whirlwind of emotions swirled within her, thoughts and memories colliding with desires. Standing before the mirror in her softly lit bedroom, she caught a glimpse of herself, 55 years old, hair tousled, fine lines around her lips that she no longer tried to hide. Yet in that reflection, she saw something new, something real, like the fire Michael had ignited within her. She stared, not bothering with makeup or adjustments, simply trying to understand who this woman was, still capable of passion, of risk. Then, in a moment that felt surreal, the bedroom door creaked open. She turned, her heart leaping as she took in Michael standing in the doorway, that silly bag in his hands, his eyes darkened with desire. Time stretched between them, 15 seconds of pure, charged silence where they simply stared at one another. His face flushed slowly, but he didn't look away. Suddenly, she realized that this confident, audacious Michael was flustered, yet he didn't retreat. He stepped forward. "You know, you're supposed to knock. This is a bedroom, after all." She finally broke the silence, her voice steady, though inside she was laughing at the absurdity of the situation. How life tossed moments at you that you'd remember with a shiver and a smile. He cleared his throat, glancing down before meeting her gaze again, the fire in his eyes unwavering. "I just came to grab a document I left in my bag. I have the keys, so I thought I'd come in," he said, but it was an obvious lie as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Just a document, huh?" she repeated, her tone sharp enough to make him blush deeper, yet he didn't falter. They both chuckled softly, the laughter washing away some of the tension that had built up throughout the evening. But not all of it, because the air still crackled. "Michael, are you serious? You just barged into your mother-in-law's bedroom without knocking." "Like it's your own home," she said, finally bending down to grab her robe and draping it over her shoulders, but the fabric slipped again, and she didn't bother to adjust it. "Let it hang, let it add to the intensity." "I didn't barge in, I knocked quietly," he protested, raising his hands in mock surrender. But his eyes were still ablaze, and they both knew the truth. Michael stepped closer, tossing his bag aside. "Of course, you knocked quietly. Is that what we're calling it now when someone barges in uninvited?" Sarah replied, rolling her eyes. Yet, a smile lingered on her lips, and the situation felt both amusing and dangerously thrilling. He stood right next to her now, the air between them vibrating with unspoken tension. "If I had known I'd be greeted like this, I would have come earlier," he began, but his voice trailed off as his eyes met hers, filled with unexpressed longing. There was something in his gaze that made her freeze, not embarrassment, nor audacity, but something in between, suggesting he had no regrets about entering and wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. "The most important thing," he said softly, almost conspiratorially, leaning in closer so she could feel his warm breath on her skin, "is that you're here, and if you're not welcomed, what's the point of living?" She laughed, though it came out as a nervous chuckle, because his hand brushed against her shoulder lightly yet deliberately. His fingers lingered, sliding lower, a compliment hidden in the touch that sent shivers down her spine. She didn't pull away, she couldn't, as her body betrayed her. She could have dismissed him, told him off, reminded him of morals and family, but instead, she just stared at him, feeling the tension build as his fingers traced her skin. "Did you find your document?" she asked hoarsely, trying to steer the conversation back to normalcy, but her voice betrayed her desire. He nodded, tapping his bag, but didn't move. "Found it, but it's time to go," he said. Yet he didn't leave, he stood there, looking at her, and she knew he was waiting for her response, a nudge, a kiss. Perhaps the silence had become unbearable. His hand slid lower along her back, and the air crackled like before a storm, charged with passion. He didn't turn back at the door, he simply stood there. They both understood that this evening wouldn't end easily. The door to the unknown was wide open, and there was no going back. Her heart raced, and she felt life pulsing in her veins, alive, dangerous. It was just the beginning of something that could destroy everything or ignite a new life full of fire. But the evening didn't end there. Michael took another step closer, wrapping his arm around her waist, pulling her nearer. She felt the warmth of his body through the thin fabric of her robe, which barely clung to her. In that moment, all thoughts of right and wrong evaporated. Only impulse remained, a desire that had been building for months, perhaps years, in the glances they exchanged during family dinners, in the casual touches that seemed innocent. "You know this is madness," she whispered, but she didn't push him away. He replied, "I know, but sometimes madness is what makes us feel alive." His lips brushed against hers, first tentatively, then deeper. It was a kiss she hadn't expected, and the world spun away, the bedroom, the mirror, everything faded. Only this kiss remained, filled with forbidden passion. And she responded, because her body remembered how to sink into an embrace. They fell onto the bed. The robe slipped completely, and his hands followed, caressing her, awakening sensations long forgotten. She gasped softly, caught between pleasure and guilt, mingled with exhilaration. He whispered, "You're beautiful, always have been, always will be." The night stretched on, full of caresses, whispers, and sighs until morning began to filter through the curtains, and reality returned with its consequences. But in that moment, it didn't matter. They were in their own world, where rules didn't exist. In the morning, he left, kissing her goodbye and promising to return. She was left alone, staring into the mirror, seeing a new woman full of life yet tinged with anxiety, because this was just the beginning, and no one knew what would come next. The fire had ignited, and it was already impossible to extinguish. Days passed, and she thought of him constantly, of that evening, of his touches. When he called, saying he wanted to see her again, she didn't refuse, for the longing was stronger than the fear. Thus began their secret, a rendezvous filled with passion and risk. Each time, she felt more alive than ever, yet she knew it could end badly if anyone found out. One day, Lena noticed something amiss, asking why Sarah seemed so distracted. Sarah lied, but inside, guilt twisted her gut. She couldn't stop, though, because Michael had become a part of her, his eyes, his hands, his words. Then one evening, he came over again, and everything repeated, but with greater intensity. They talked for hours about life, desires, about how they could be together if not for circumstances, and once again, the night was theirs, filled with love. But morning brought doubt, and she asked, "What are we doing?" He replied, "We're living, finally living." This continued for months, secret meetings, texts, stolen glances at family gatherings, and the tension grew until one day her husband suspected something, saw a message, and everything fell apart. Scandal, tears, Lena in shock, divorce, pain. Yet in that pain was freedom, because she chose herself, chose life. Looking back now, she knows that evening was the beginning of a new chapter, full of ups and downs, but real. Subscribe to the channel,